Good morning. It's time for us to begin our class this morning. Certainly good to see everybody here. Looks like we're missing a few, but that's okay. We know where they're at, kind of, sort of. We know they're in other countries. Anyway, got several missing this morning. Michael's out he'll be back next Sunday. So you got me filling in this morning. And we are starting the book of Esther, chapters 1 and 2. Esther, chapters 1 and 2. So if you want to get your Bible and go ahead and turn there. We will begin right here. Thankfully, I didn't get Zechariah. I'm pretty happy about that. So in your workbook, it says today's class is Esther 1 and 2, and then it's got Ezra. If you want to go ahead and look at that, Ezra, the next couple classes, and I'm gonna usurp that. I'm going to do lesson 15, Esther 3 through 7. So I'm going to do 1 through 2 today, and then 3 through 7 on Wednesday night, and then Michael can get back and catch up on Ezra next Sunday. So nobody got any objection to that? Do we need to take a vote or anything? So we're ready to begin. If you bow your heads, I'll say a prayer. Dear God, we thank you for the blessings of the day. Thank you for the mighty privilege that we have to open our Bibles and study from your word this morning. We thank you for all the gifts that you've blessed us with, but we thank you most for all the spiritual things that keep us and sustain us in this life. Be with us this morning as we study from the Old Testament, as we look at Esther and her life and the importance of it and all the ways that God deals with man and how we see his control in all of these things. We pray for all the other classes this morning and for the kids, and we pray that all will be edified and we'll all learn and have a good time learning about God today. Thank you for all you do for us, and thank you for blessing us. Thank you for loving us. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Okay, so the one thing that I'm not going to do is get into Michael's Who's the King. I'm not going to get into Who's the King. We know it's Ahasuerus. That's what the New King James says in verse 1. And whether that is also Xerxes, we're pretty sure of. And whether that's also Darius, we'll let Michael have to deal with that one. As you can, if you've still got your timeline from the very first of the class, in his proposed timeline, he's got these three folks kind of being the same person, and I'm not going to jump on that this morning. So we know from Esther 1 and verse 1 that it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. This was Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. So we got the Persian Empire stretching from India way over here to Ethiopia way over here. I don't have the map, but it's a huge province or territory, and the biggest territory in the world at that time until Alexander came later and made it a little larger. But it's a huge area as you look at it. So and then in verse 2, in the days when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the citadel. So that goes to Michael's first question, and so we'll look at that right now. It says, this morning our focus shifts from Jerusalem to Susa. Where is Susa and what we know about it from history? So my version says Shushan. The other versions say Susa. So I guess the question, what do we know? Do we know anything about it? Number one, where's it located? In Persia. It's one of the capitals of Persia. Let's say again. okay, southern part of the province. What country would it be in today? Yeah, it'd be in Iran today. If you think about all the stuff that's going on in the Middle East today, you know where Afghanistan's at. Next country over is Iran. So right in the middle of all the turmoil that's in the world today, that is where Shusha or Susa was. It was conquered. It was the capital of Western Iran, conquered by Cyrus, became one of the four Persian capitals. Because it's such a large territory, they had four actually capitals. Michael kind of mentioned them. Anybody remember who one of the others might have been? Babylon was one of them. Susa, and there's a town called Ecbatana, I think, and then one called Persiolis. So there was four, such a large territory, and they were conquering, and they would make these other cities part of their domain, but they actually had four capitals. But Susa was the main capital, and this is where we see this king Ahasuerus at, and his other name is Xerxes for sure, and I think that's in the King James version. Does it say Xerxes? Anybody got King James? Everybody's version says what? In verse 1, who is this king? Everybody says Ahasuerus. Okay, but certainly the Greek name is Xerxes. Okay, so we read about this Susa and other places. If you want to turn to remember Nehemiah chapter 1 and verse 2. Anybody want to read Nehemiah 1, 2 when you get there? Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, chapter 1, verse 1. I'm sorry. Sorry. Yeah, okay. Okay, so we got Nehemiah when he starts his book, that he is in this same city. He's in Shushan. So as we've talked about, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, all contemporaries, all kind of the same time frame. According to the outline that Michael hands out, they're exactly the same. Others have got a few different years and differences there, but this Susa, or where they're located, is the capital, and a very important place. We read about Daniel being there as well in Daniel 8 and verse 2. Daniel was at the same city, so this was a very, very the capital, big place, massive. Michael wrote down on one of his notes, Darius had a house in Susa, and it became the winter residence of all the 1,000 square feet residence. So that's a big old house. That's a big old house. We just built a warehouse that's about that size, and I can't imagine a house being that big. That's a big old house. And also he noted there that Daniel was believed to have been buried in Susa. And there's nothing to give us a lot of detail on that, but that is one of the things that others think for sure. So we got this king. He's got a huge province. Reign in verse 3, and he decides to have a small feast. Somebody give me some details of something about this feast. The first feast. Okay, it lasted 180 days or 6 months. These people are having a big feast, and who all was involved in this feast? Okay, in verse 3 it says, made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles, the princes of the province being before him. has a huge feast. Some think this is part of a getting ready to go to war, getting all the troops rallied. Whatever reason, we're really not sure, but it's a huge feast. And what does he show off here in verse 4? Okay, he shows off the riches of his glorious kingdom. So that tells us a little bit about this king. What do we think his character is? Very prideful. What else? If you read up on him, he's a very cruel guy too. I mean, he's ruthless and cruel and prideful. There's not much good found about this guy in history. So this king has a huge feast, lasts 180 days, all through the province, and so it is a huge deal. And it talks about in verse 6 all the blue linen curtains and the gold and silver and pavement, turquoise, white, and marble. So big deal. And 180 days and showing off all that he's got here in this beautiful palace. So that's the first feast. And then it talks about, our question says, what are three celebrations? So the second one is what? Okay, so we have a second feast that's talked about here, and it lasted for 7 days, and it was just for the folks in Susa. It was just those the inner court, you would say. And what do we know about this feast? Anything exciting going on? It was. Okay. It sounded like just a part. Verse 7, they served drinks in golden vessels, and each vessel different from the other, with royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king. So again, this king is not a good guy. He's a good guy. Said in accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory. So you didn't have to drink. It wasn't that they made you drink. But if you wanted to, it goes on to say, the king had ordered the officers of the household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. You could drink as much as you liked. And so this went on for 7 days. So why is this recorded? Why has God saved this for us? Okay, show the arrogance of this king, and because he's going to fall, and he's just, each thing that we see here, he's setting the table for what comes next. He's kind of, we talk about the providence of God, and if there's ever a book in the Bible that I think depicts the providence of God, this book is it. I mean, the things that happen. And then you say, why did that happen? And then you find out later, well, God had a purpose for that. And besides for the story of Joseph, which I think is absolutely full of providence, Esther is one that is certainly, you would say, fits in that. So I threw that word out there. What is providence? What is the providence of God? Okay, so God knows He knows the end from the beginning, and He works out things in His ways to accomplish His purpose. So one definition I wrote down here: God uses circumstances and events to accomplish His purpose, and certainly we see that throughout the book of Esther. And we'll talk about some of those. The one that just jumps out at you is when we'll talk about later is the two fellows that are planning to kill the king, and Mordecai finds out about it, and they record it. Then the king can't sleep at night. So the king not sleeping, well, why is that recorded? Well, then he got up and read the Chronicles, and there it was, the two guys, Mordecai. He'd never been rewarded for what he had done. So all of that in my mind, is God working out his plan. We don't know why, but we know that he certainly does. So I guess that brings us to, do we have God's divine providence working today? Yeah, I think so. I think so. Do we understand it? No, we don't understand it. We don't know how God is, why he's doing this, why this thing is happening here or this thing's happening there. But as Christians, I think, our faith would lead us to say that God's in control. He knows the end, and he's hopefully he's using us to fulfill his goals. But at times it's evil people like Ahasuerus here. It's not always the good guys that God uses. We see throughout the Old Testament, God uses bad people to fulfill his purpose. And I'm sure they didn't get it back then, but later on, you kind of see what's going on there. So that's the second banquet that question 2 talks about, a second celebration. What's the third celebration? Okay, queen. What's the queen's name? Vashti. Not sure how that I is used, but so she's the queen. And so verse 10, on the 7th day, so this drunken feast has been going on for 7 days. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was wine, he commanded Mehuman, there's 7 eunuchs here who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. So we've got the third feast or celebration was the one that she was having with her own court, which was evidently in a house next to the palace. And so she was there, the queen was there, and the king, at the end of the 7th day, wants to bring the queen out to display her before these guys, and she refuses to come. So, I guess Michael's next question, number 3. What do you think of Vashti's refusal of the king's request? We think it was a good thing, bad thing? What do we think? Donna says more power to her. And why do you all come to that conclusion? Okay. She refused to do it, wanted to show her off in front of these drunken men. Okay, Carol, I'll let you tell your story. Secular history.
Right.
Okay.
Believe it or not.
So she had her crown on and she was going to go out, according to Carol's secular history, and she was stricken with leprosy. I don't know where you find that, but anyway, Carol told me that this morning. I said, Carol, I've never heard that one. I don't know where that one came from. So blot that out of your book of remembrance. She refuses to go before the king, and so. Okay, yeah, I read that as well, that we know she had a son, Xerxes the second, first, can't get my king straight, around this time. So there is a strong possibility that she was pregnant, and another reason she didn't want to go out and show herself in front of all these drunken men. Okay, and so we'll go on with that, and come back to that one, but so what happens after that? So then the king, verse 13, then the king said to his wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice, those closest to him, and there's these fellows that are around his court, ranked highest in his kingdom. And the question is, what shall we do to Queen Vashti according to the law, because she did not obey the king and brought to her by the eunuch. She didn't obey, she didn't come. And so this one fella, Memucan in verse 16, and said, not only has Queen Vashti wronged the king, but also all the princes and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so they will despise their husbands in their eyes when they report King Ahasuerus commanded Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. So his wise advisors say, something's got to be done here. You can't let her get away with this, or all of our wives will react this way when we call upon them. Yes, ma'am. Okay. 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 True. So, okay. Okay. Now, Judy's comment is today and throughout God's word are to be submissive to their husbands if there's no sin involved. And this may have been, I would think this would probably been sin. And the other part is we're to have respect for those in authority. Even today, that's a law that we all should observe. So a couple of other things that kind of were on her, as Judy said, on the other side of that coin. But overall, we'd have to think that her coming out and parading for a bunch of drunk men there's nothing good that can come out of that. She refused to do that. The other men, I mean, this is a time in the lives of when women were treated way worse than they are today, and her behavior to these guys looked like something that needed to be taken care of. So what is done? What happens? She gets kicked out. She gets removed. So what is the decree? What's the edict that goes out? Okay, she's going to not be allowed to appear before the king again. Okay, 19 through 22. It says, when the king's decree, which he will make, is proclaimed throughout all the empire, wives honor their husbands, both great and small. And the reply pleased the king and the provinces, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. He sent letters to all the provinces, to each province in its own script, and every people in their own language, that each man should be master in his own house and speak in the language of his own people. So a couple there, the guy was to be the master, and then he was supposed to speak the language of his own people, which was kind of an interesting thing that was thrown in there. So this chapter 1, Vashti and all that went on with her, and her costly decision that she made cost her. And do we hear anything else about her after this chapter? So I mean, she's vanished, I guess, to I don't know if she was kicked out of the city or not. Anybody know that? I didn't see that, but we get she is removed from her queenship for sure. So get down to chapter 2, and it starts with after these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus had subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what he had decreed against her. There's lots of commentary out there that says between I think it's 3 years, a 3-year period here that because it talks about him being in the 3rd year of his reign in verse 3, and then it talks about here, I think this is the 6th year. Anyway, there's a time frame there, and some commentators think that he was gone to the war with the Greeks, that there was a war for those 3 years, and he came back, and after these things, after all that had taken place, he's back home, and he remembers that he doesn't have a queen anymore. So there's not somebody to take care of him. So anyway, not sure if that's all true or not. Could be. It kind of makes sense to me. that possibly could happen. There's a gap of 2 or 3 years here. But anyway, verse 2, he's back home, he remembers, and evidently he's not happy about that situation. So the king's servants notice that he's not happy, and what is their solution to the problem? Okay, we got to find a new queen. And how in the world do we go about having this? How do we select this queen? Okay, I mean, we're talking about this territory. Remember that map? We're stretching from India to Ethiopia, and there's a lot of country there. And it says, verse 2, let the king's servants said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan, the citadel, into the women's quarters under the custody of the king's eunuch, custodian of the women, and let beauty preparations be given them. Then let the young women who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This thing pleased the king, and he did so. So we've got this, in my mind, just a terrible, terrible thing happens here. So they go out through all the land, and beautiful young women, virgins, are all taken from their homes and drug into Susa to prepare to be able to meet the king. Can you imagine I can imagine being a parent in that situation. So they come in and drag your daughter and take her off hundreds of miles away to be basically in the harem of a king. So again, not a good time for women, not a good king, not morally anything good going on here particularly. Any thoughts, comments on first part of chapter 2? Question was, did I read how many women came? And I did not. Carol said somewhere she had read there were 400. I would have guessed 4,000, but 400 is. Anybody else got that? You see that number anywhere? So we got all these young women. They're drug into Susa, and but there is a time period before they can go into the king. Anybody remember how long that was? 1 year. Well, so what's the reason that the Bible? Well, see here. Why do they say that it takes a year? Okay, they had to put on all these oils and spices and all these to get prepared to go in to see the king. We find that through in verses. Where's all that? Verse 12, each young woman came to go into King Ahasuerus after she had completed 12 months preparation according to regulations for women. For thus was the days of their preparation apportioned, 6 months with oil and myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. So we got this long process of getting these women ready to go in to be with the king for one evening, and to see if they're the one that is selected. There's other commentaries that say that they needed that amount of time to ensure that these girls were indeed virgins and that they weren't pregnant, because they didn't want a pregnancy to occur during that time and it not be the king's. So that was another thing that kind of struck me. Yeah, might have been some teaching as far as how they should act if they became the queen. Could have been that going on. But so we got this. We got this dragging in of all these ladies, young ladies, and then in verse 5 we're introduced to the fellow by the name of Mordecai. It says, in Shushan, the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of a Benjaminite, away Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured when Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. So we've got this Jew called Mordecai. And every time you see Mordecai's name, he says, Mordecai the Jew. So we know Mordecai's a Jew. It becomes a big deal that he certainly is a Jew. And verse 7, and Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter. So they're cousins. Mordecai and Esther are cousins, although Mordecai is much older. For she had neither father or mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So we've got this, we're introduced to Mordecai. And many people have said this book, instead of being called the Book of Esther, could be called the Book of Mordecai, because he plays a critical role in this, in protecting and maintaining the heritage of the Jews, certainly. You know a little bit about Mordecai. He was son of Kish, a Benjaminite, so he's got some a good background there, and he's raised up Hadassah or Esther from her youth, and so she more or less treats him as a father, and he treats her as a daughter. So there is a great deal of devotion there for sure. So the king's command went out. She's brought in. She's placed in this residence where all these women are. In verse 10, it said Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. So what does that mean? She had not revealed her people. So what's the importance of that? They didn't know she was a Jew. They didn't realize that Esther was a Jew. And that becomes a big deal. Chapter 2 later, when Haman wants to exterminate all the Jews, he doesn't realize that he's just telling the king, I'm going to kill your wife. And it probably wouldn't have been the thing that he would have done had he known. But he at this point, he did not know. Haman did not know. And I guess Mordecai and only a few others understood that Esther truly was of Jewish descent. Anything I missed there? Anybody want to talk about anything? Let's see. So moving on. One of the questions, verse number 5, what do we learn from the character of Esther from chapter 2? So we'll go back to that in just a second. Verse 12, each young woman's turn came to go into the king, and after that 12-month period, verse 13, thus prepared each woman the king, was given whatever she needed to take with her. In the evening she went, and in the morning she returned to the second house of the women in the custody of Shazgaz, the king's eunuch who kept the concubine. So terrible, morally corrupt situation here. We got all these young virgins. One day, the next day they go to the king, and the next day they get sent to the house of the concubines. And how long do they stay there? Probably for life. I mean, they're probably there for life. And they never get to go back to see the king unless he asks for them to come back. And so just a very degrading, immoral thing that goes on here. But that's what was going on. Verse 15, and when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter to go to the king, she requested nothing but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised, and Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. Esther is this beautiful woman. She's evidently very well liked. Everybody likes her. She finds favor in all that see her. So Esther was taken to the king, and in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. That's where I got the 7th year. So that 7th year. So this is 4 years after chapter 1. So of course, they had the 1 year of preparation, so there's a span of time there. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, which is kind of odd because he didn't have her back for 30 days. But anyway, he loved Esther more than all the women. She obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, for all his officials and servants. They're really big on feast. If something they want to celebrate, they do some serious celebrating, evidently. So they have a feast for Esther, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces, gave gifts according to the generosity of a king. So he's found him a new queen. He's very happy about it, and he's passing out gifts to everybody to show his happiness. When the virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, so we got that going on. She hadn't told anybody that she's a Jew, just as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. We got that devotion. Mordecai has told her, don't tell them who you are. You don't want to do that. And so she hadn't. So this 21 through 23 is, again, this providence of God thing. Why this would be recorded, why this happened at this point doesn't make any sense at all. Later it starts to make a lot of sense. In those days, starting verse 21, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. That is a hard word to say. So these two guys that are part of, they say they're doorkeepers, so they're part of the inner circle in a way. They come up with a plan. They want to assassinate the king. My warranty on my car is up, so I don't have to take that. Okay, so here we are. We got these two fellas. They're worked up a plan. They're going to assassinate the king. They're mad at the king for some reason. And Mordecai, who's hanging around, seeing what's going on with Esther, he, although he's not on the inside, he's kind of walks, as he walks around the circle, the gate, he hears about it by the providence of God. So the matter to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther confirmed the king in Mordecai's name. And when the inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both these two fellows, Bigthan and Teresh, hanged on the gallows, and it was the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Well, that is seems like a minor thing, and why it's recorded here seems like a minor thing, but it becomes a major thing a little bit later in this story about the providence of God. So they confirm it, as it says there. They confirm these guys did have this plan, and they're hanged. And then, as they did with lots of things, they took notes, or they wrote in the book of the Chronicles all that's going on in the kingdom, and they made a note of that, and that these two guys were identified to the queen by Mordecai. And that's all that we really see there is that actually happened. So finish up some of the rest of the story. When does that become really important? Why does that become important? Okay, so I don't remember if that's in chapter 3 or 4 exactly where that's at, but later on in this story, the king can't sleep. Why? Again, providence of God. The king can't sleep. He asked for somebody to come read the Chronicles to him. As they sat down and start reading to him, they say, well, here's where this happened, and these two guys planned to assassinate you, and Mordecai told the queen, and it was all true. And he asked the question, well, how have we rewarded Mordecai? What have we done for him? Was he rewarded in any way? And had he been? No, and nothing had happened at all. And then the king says, well, let's not have that. Let's have a reward. And then there's a huge, and we'll talk about that later. I'm not going to get into all that, but that becomes a turning point in this whole deal with Esther, the Jews, and how that Haman wants to have them totally exterminated, and this story becomes a part of this providence of God. and just an amazing thing to me. So the question number 5, what did we learn from the character of Esther from chapter 2? Liked her. She pleases everyone. Humble, did you say? Okay. Okay. The eunuch that took care of her, she found favor in his sight, and he took care of her, but she didn't ask for any special things when she went in to see the king. Trusted the eunuch to give her good advice and what to do when she went in to meet the king. And just Esther is a character that just got a great character. She just seems like a good lady. Other thoughts, comments on number 5? Okay. She obviously loved Mordecai. He said, "Don't tell who you are or what your heritage is." She didn't do that. She did. It said she obeyed him throughout her life. Number 6. How do we see the providence of God working in chapters 1 and 2? Just in 1 and 2, what do we see? Okay, we got Vashti is deposed, and Esther becomes the queen. Certainly, would they have normally have if they had known her she was a Jew, would they have chosen her? No, it would have been against the law. They would not have chosen her at all, or king would not have chosen a Jew at all. So anyway, Vashti refuses to go before the king. She's deposed. Esther is chosen. Mordecai's at the king's gate. Here's the plot. Saves the king. Gets his name written in the royal chronicles, which becomes a big deal. Okay. 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 So Carol said that Mordecai, as we've read and talked about, he was always around the king's gate because he was checking on Esther, seeing her circumstances. But a lot of the Jews had already gone back to Jerusalem. Remember, this is during that time that a lot of them have already left. So we've got a segment of the Jews, which we've talked about, a large segment that stayed in Babylon and Susa in that area because they did not want to return. Things were going pretty good for them. Carol's point, he wasn't the only Jew that was hanging around in Susa. There were other Jews there at the time, but so it wasn't uncommon for a Jew to be there. But they would have been selected as far as the inner court or those that were dealing with the king. Another point that Esther's beauty and grace puts her in a position to persuade the king, and that's you can see that in this as this unfolds. That the king tells her 2 or 3 or 4 times, "Tell me whatever you want, up to half of the kingdom. I'll give you half of the kingdom." I don't know if that's where we get when you have a divorce today. Everybody gets half. I don't know where that comes from, but certainly 2 or 3 times he was pleased with the beauty of Esther, and 2 or 3 times we'll see in the preceding chapters here that up to half the kingdom I'll give you. So we are out of time. So we'll pick up here in chapter 3 on Wednesday night, and we go 3 through 7.